You know that feeling when you've given everything, and they still want more? Carl Jung uncovered something that would make every narcissist's blood run cold. A fed-up empath isn't just dangerous, they're unstoppable. Not because they turn cruel, not because they seek revenge, but because they become something far more terrifying, unbreakable. For decades, Jung sat across from souls who'd been hollowed out by emotional vampires. He watched empaths, those beautiful, self-sacrificing spirits who absorb everyone's pain like it's their job, hit a breaking point that transforms them into something their abusers never saw coming. He called it the alchemical moment, that instant when years of swallowed poison suddenly transmutes into pure psychological gold, when the empath stops being a dumping ground for everyone's darkness and becomes an unstoppable force of light that no manipulation can ever dim again. Here's what makes narcissists lose sleep. A fed-up empath doesn't fight back with the same dirty weapons. They don't stoop to that level. They do something far more devastating. They transcend the entire battlefield. Today, we're diving deep into Jung's most haunting insights about what happens when the gentlest souls finally whisper, "Enough," and why that single word changes absolutely everything. Jung discovered something modern psychology still refuses to acknowledge. Your gentleness was never weakness. It was strength in disguise, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. He wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But for empaths, this acceptance demands something even more frightening, accepting that you possess a power you've been conditioned to fear your entire life." Jung called this the shadow integration of the wounded healer. Think about his perspective on archetypes for a moment. The empath embodies what he termed the wounded healer, someone who gains profound wisdom through suffering. But here's what Jung witnessed that changes everything. When this archetype reaches its breaking point, it doesn't shatter. It transforms into what I call the sovereign healer, someone who heals from a place of unshakable strength rather than endless sacrifice. And this transformation? It's not some gentle, Instagram-worthy awakening with soft music and meditation candles. It's what Jung called enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually becomes its opposite. The endless giver becomes the conscious chooser. The perpetual absorber becomes the strategic reflector. The people pleaser becomes the boundary setter who won't apologize for it. Modern neuroscience is finally catching up to what Jung knew instinctively. Dr. Judith Orloff's research proves that empathic individuals have hyperactive mirror neurons, heightened activity in brain regions tied to emotional processing. Your brain is literally wired differently. But here's what Jung realized decades ago. This same wiring that makes you vulnerable also makes you devastatingly powerful when you learn to direct it consciously. But that's not even the most dangerous part. The most dangerous part? What happens when an empath finally integrates what Jung called the shadow? All that repressed anger, those buried boundaries, that self-protection they've been shamed into denying. Jung observed something chilling. Empaths don't just suppress their own negative emotions. They become unconscious containers for everyone else's shadow material. Your mother's rage she couldn't express. Your friend's grief they couldn't process. Your partner's manipulation they couldn't acknowledge. You become what I call a walking trauma repository, a human storage unit for pain that was never yours to carry. But Jung discovered something extraordinary in his clinical work. When empaths finally reach their limit, they don't just release this accumulated shadow, they alchemize it. They transform years of absorbed poison into what he called psychological gold. This is Jung's transcendent function in action, the ability to transform opposing forces into something entirely new. Here's how this metamorphosis actually unfolds, and this is where Jung's observations become absolutely terrifying for narcissists. Stage 1. The recognition. The veil lifts. Suddenly, you see the pattern with crystal clarity. All those times you absorbed blame that wasn't yours. All those moments you apologized for their bad behavior. All those years you believed love meant endless giving while receiving nothing but crumbs. Jung called this the lifting of the veil, when unconscious patterns burst into consciousness like sunlight through broken blinds. Stage 2. The integration. Here's where it gets powerful. The empath doesn't reject their sensitivity. They weaponize it. They use their hyperperceptive abilities not to absorb and please, but to see through manipulation before it even begins. Jung observed that integrated empaths become psychological seers. They can read people's unconscious motivations with surgical precision. Stage 3. The sovereignty. The empath stops seeking external validation and becomes what Jung called individuated psychologically, whole and self-directed. They no longer need others to complete them because they've completed themselves through conscious shadow work. This creates what I call the empathic paradox. The more you integrate your shadow, the more compassionate you become. But your compassion is no longer naive. It's fierce, discerning, and absolutely terrifying to those who depend on your dysfunction to feel powerful. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, but felt there was hidden strength in that sensitivity, comment, "My sensitivity is my superpower." Now you're discovering what Jung called the dark side of empathy, not the absorption of others' pain, but the conscious weaponization of empathic abilities for discernment and protection. When an empath awakens, their sensitivity doesn't diminish, it becomes surgical. They can feel the narcissist's emotional state beneath their performance. They sense manipulation before it's fully formed. They detect lies through micro-expressions and energy shifts that everyone else misses completely. Jung understood this level of perception as active imagination, the ability to perceive psychological realities operating beneath surface appearances. The awakened empath becomes what I call a truth detector that no amount of charm or manipulation can fool. Let me show you this transformation through 3 powerful scenarios. The workplace predator. Sarah worked with a colleague who was a master at taking credit while deflecting blame. For years, she absorbed his projections, believed his gaslighting, questioned her own sanity. But when she applied Jung's shadow work, she began seeing the pattern clearly. She stopped explaining herself, stopped defending her work, stopped trying to prove her competence to someone whose opinion was utterly irrelevant. The shift was immediate. Without Sarah's emotional labor to feed on, his mask began slipping. Others started noticing his behavior because Sarah was no longer absorbing the tension he created. She'd become what Jung called psychologically immune to his manipulations. The family manipulator. Michael's mother controlled him for decades through guilt, shame, and emotional blackmail. She'd threaten suicide when he set boundaries, play victim when he succeeded, make every conversation about her suffering. Michael had spent 30 years being her emotional regulator. When he integrated Jung's teachings about individuation, he stopped participating in the drama. He felt compassion for her pain without taking responsibility for it. He set boundaries without explanation. He refused to debate his worth or defend his choices. His mother's manipulations became desperate, then, eventually, stopped. Without Michael's participation, she was forced to find healthier ways to meet her emotional needs or find new victims. Michael had become manipulation-proof, the romantic vampire. Lisa walked on eggshells for years, managing her partner's moods, accepting responsibility for their happiness. She believed love meant endless sacrifice, and that their criticism was helping her become better. When Lisa discovered Jung's work on psychological projection, everything clicked. Her partner was using her as a dumping ground for their own self-hatred. Every criticism they leveled at her was actually something they couldn't accept about themselves. Lisa stopped defending, stopped explaining, stopped trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. The relationship ended quickly. Without Lisa's unconscious participation in the dynamic, there was nothing left. Her partner couldn't maintain their illusion of superiority without someone to feel superior to. In every case, notice, the empath didn't become cruel or vengeful. They simply became conscious. And consciousness, as Jung knew, is the greatest threat to unconscious manipulation. But here's where Jung's understanding becomes truly revolutionary. The fed-up empath doesn't just escape the narcissistic dynamic. They transform it into wisdom, that makes them immune to future manipulation. Jung called this the integration of opposites. The empath learns to hold compassion and discernment, openness and boundaries, love and self-protection. They become what I call the integrated warrior healer, someone who can love fiercely while protecting themselves completely. This integration creates what Jung termed the transcendent function, a psychological state where apparent opposites unite to create something greater than the sum of their parts. Your former weakness becomes your strength. But your former strength doesn't become weakness. Instead, both qualities mature into conscious wisdom. Jung observed this transformation repeatedly in his clinical work. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For empaths, this means not just seeing your own shadow, but recognizing how you've been unconsciously complicit in your own victimization. Here's the truth that will set you free. You weren't targeted randomly. You were chosen because you possess something the narcissist lacked the capacity for: genuine feeling, authentic connection, real empathy. But instead of giving these gifts away unconsciously, you learn to share them consciously with those who can reciprocate. This creates what I call the empathic revolution. Instead of trying to heal the unhealable, empaths begin seeking out and nurturing other conscious beings. They stop being drawn to broken people who need fixing. They start being attracted to whole people who want to grow together. If you've realized your empathy is not a weakness to manage but a strength to direct, comment, "I choose who receives my energy." Here's Jung's framework for empathic metamorphosis, based on his principles of individuation and shadow integration. 1. Recognize the pattern. Jung emphasized making unconscious patterns conscious. You must see how you've been participating in your own depletion. This isn't self-blame, it's empowerment. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Start documenting your interactions. When do you feel drained? Who consistently takes more than they give? What stories do you tell yourself to justify staying in depleting relationships? Jung called this the examination of conscience, not from a moral standpoint, but a psychological one. 2. Integrate the shadow. Jung believed shadow integration was essential for psychological wholeness. For empaths, this means reclaiming all the qualities you've been taught to suppress. Anger, selfishness, the capacity to say no without explanation. The shadow isn't evil, it's unlived life. Your anger might be righteous indignation that desperately needed expression. Your selfishness might be healthy self-care that was long overdue. Your capacity for boundaries might be wisdom disguised as coldness. Practice expressing these shadow qualities in small, safe ways. Say no without elaborate justification. Feel angry without immediately trying to understand the other person's perspective. Choose yourself without drowning in guilt. 3. Stop the energy leak. Jung understood that psychological energy is finite and precious. Empaths must learn what he called psychological economy, the conscious management of emotional and mental resources. This means identifying energy drains and plugging them systematically. Stop explaining yourself to people who don't want to understand. Stop trying to convince those committed to misunderstanding you. Stop giving your attention to people who weaponize it against you. Create what I call energy audits. Regularly assess who and what adds to your vitality versus what depletes it. Jung believed protecting your psychological energy isn't selfish, it's necessary for psychological health. 4. Embody authentic power. Jung's ultimate goal was individuation, becoming who you truly are, rather than who others need you to be. For empaths, this means embodying your full spectrum of human experience, not just the parts that make others comfortable. Authentic power isn't dominance over others, it's sovereignty over yourself. It's the ability to choose your responses rather than react unconsciously. It's the strength to love without losing yourself. It's giving without depleting yourself. It's caring without sacrificing yourself. This embodiment terrifies those who've benefited from your unconsciousness because they can no longer predict or control your responses. You become what Jung called psychologically autonomous self-directed rather than other-directed. When an empath awakens using Jung's principles, they don't just transform their own life, they contribute to what Jung called collective consciousness evolution. He believed individual psychological development impacts the entire human collective. When one person breaks free from unconscious patterns, they create what I call permission waves that help others do the same. The awakened empath becomes a living example that transformation is possible. But Jung warned about the inflation of the ego, the danger of becoming arrogant about your psychological development. The awakened empath must guard against seeing themselves as superior to those still trapped in unconscious patterns. True empathic awakening includes humility. You remember your own journey from unconsciousness to awareness. You feel compassion for others still making that journey. You become what Jung called wounded healers, who have been healed, capable of helping others without losing yourself in the process. This creates conscious empathic communities, groups of people who've done their inner work and can love each other without drama, manipulation, or energy vampirism. These communities become models for healthy human relationships based on mutual respect rather than unconscious need. Jung envisioned a future where enough individuals achieved psychological wholeness to impact the collective human psyche. The awakened empath is part of this vision. You're not just healing yourself, you're contributing to the healing of relationship patterns that have been dysfunctional for generations. But here's what Jung understood that makes fed-up empaths truly dangerous. You expose the entire system of unconscious manipulation that our society is built on. When empaths stop absorbing others' projections, stop managing others' emotions, stop sacrificing themselves for unworthy causes, they reveal how much of human interaction is based on unconscious psychological vampirism. You show that much of what we call normal relationships are actually dysfunctional patterns, disguised as love, care, or responsibility. Jung wrote, "The world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man." The awakened empath represents what happens when that psyche becomes conscious of its power and refuses to participate in unconscious destruction. This is why awakened empaths often face resistance not just from narcissists, but from entire family systems, workplace cultures, and social groups that depend on your unconscious participation. Your awakening threatens the status quo of unconscious relationship dynamics. But Jung believed this resistance is necessary for collective growth. He called it the tension of opposites, the conflict between conscious and unconscious forces that ultimately leads to psychological evolution. The awakened empath represents the conscious force that challenges unconscious patterns. This makes you dangerous to anyone whose power depends on others remaining unconscious. You become what I call unconsciousness disruptors, people whose mere presence challenges others to examine their own psychological patterns. The narcissist fears you because they can no longer use you. But the entire system of unconscious manipulation fears you because you model a different way of being that makes unconscious patterns visible and unacceptable. If you've noticed your growth has made some people uncomfortable, but you refuse to shrink back to make them comfortable, comment, "I will not dim my light for others' darkness." Here's Jung's most profound insight about fed-up empaths. Your ultimate danger lies not in what you do, but in what you refuse to do anymore. You refuse to absorb what isn't yours. You refuse to manage others' emotions. You refuse to sacrifice your well-being for others' comfort. You refuse to explain yourself to those who don't want to understand. You refuse to participate in drama that doesn't serve growth. This refusal is more powerful than any attack because it's based on Jung's principle of psychological nonviolence. The awakened empath doesn't need to fight the narcissist. They simply withdraw their participation from the dynamic. Without your unconscious cooperation, the entire manipulative system collapses. Jung observed that this withdrawal often triggers what he called the shadow projection crisis in the narcissist. Without you to carry their disowned feelings, the narcissist is forced to face their own emotional reality. This is unbearable for someone who's spent their life avoiding their inner world. The narcissist may escalate their manipulation attempts, become more aggressive, frantically seek new sources of empathic supply. But the awakened empath remains unmoved. You've learned what Jung called psychological immunity, the ability to witness others' emotional storms without being pulled into them. This immunity isn't coldness, it's clarity. You can feel compassion for the narcissist's pain while refusing to enable their harmful behavior. You can love the person while rejecting the dysfunction. This nuanced response is something narcissists cannot understand or manipulate. Jung identified 3 levels of empathic development. Understanding where you are determines your vulnerability to manipulation. Level 1. The unconscious empath. You feel everything, but understand nothing. You absorb others' emotions without realizing it. You believe love means endless giving and that boundaries are selfish. You attract energy vampires because you haven't learned to protect your psychological space. At this level, your empathy controls you, rather than you controlling it. You're like a sponge that soaks up whatever it encounters. The goal? Developing what Jung called psychological boundaries, the ability to feel with others without losing yourself in them. Level 2. The awakening empath. You recognize your empathic abilities and begin understanding how they've been weaponized against you. You start learning about Jung's concepts, projection, shadow work, psychological boundaries. You begin seeing patterns in your relationships and taking responsibility for your part in them. At this level, you're developing what Jung called conscious empathy, the ability to choose when and how to engage your empathic abilities. You're learning to distinguish between your emotions and others' emotions. Level 3. The sovereign empath. You've integrated Jung's teachings about shadow work and individuation. You can feel deeply without being overwhelmed. You can love fully without losing yourself. You've developed what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the ability to remain centered in your own truth while remaining open to others. At this level, your empathy becomes a tool for wisdom rather than a weapon used against you. You can sense others' emotional states without taking responsibility for them. You can offer support without sacrificing yourself. The journey from level 1 to level 3 requires what Jung called the courage to become conscious. You must be willing to see how you've participated in your own victimization. Not to blame yourself, but to reclaim your power to choose differently. But Jung issued a critical warning about empathic awakening. With great psychological power comes great responsibility. The awakened empath possesses abilities that can be used for healing or harm. Your ability to see through others' masks, to detect deception, to understand hidden motivations. These gifts must be used consciously and ethically. Jung emphasized that the goal of individuation isn't to become invulnerable, but to become authentic. The awakened empath must guard against becoming what you once suffered under, someone who uses psychological insight to manipulate rather than heal. The highest expression of empathic awakening is what Jung called conscious compassion, the ability to love without enabling, to help without rescuing, to see clearly without judging harshly. This is the difference between empathic wisdom and empathic revenge. Some empaths, when they first awaken, want to use their power to hurt those who hurt them. They want to expose narcissists, shame manipulators, make others feel the pain they felt. But Jung understood, this keeps you trapped in the very dynamic you're trying to escape. True empathic sovereignty means rising above the need for revenge. It means using your gifts to create healthy relationships rather than destroy unhealthy ones. It means being dangerous to manipulation while remaining safe for authentic connection. The fed-up empath's ultimate power isn't in what you can do to others, it's in what you can create for yourself. A life of authentic relationships, conscious choices, genuine peace. Remember Jung's discovery about fed-up empaths being more dangerous than narcissists ever imagined? The danger was never in becoming cruel or vengeful. The danger was in becoming conscious, sovereign, and immune to manipulation. Jung wrote in his final works, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For empaths, this means embracing both your sensitivity and your strength, your compassion and your discernment, your capacity to love, and your right to be loved authentically in return. The empath who finally says, "enough," doesn't lose their ability to feel deeply. They gain the ability to feel wisely. They don't close their heart. They learn to open it selectively to those who have earned access through their own consciousness and authenticity. Jung observed that the greatest danger to unconscious systems isn't conscious opposition, it's conscious withdrawal. When empaths stop participating in dysfunctional dynamics, those dynamics can no longer sustain themselves. Your sensitivity was never your weakness. It was your early warning system alerting you to toxic people and environments. Your deep feeling was never too much. It was the full spectrum of human experience that others had learned to numb. Your desire for authentic connection was never naive. It was your soul calling you toward relationships worthy of your depth. The narcissist feared your awakening because they knew, once you saw clearly, you could never be fooled again. Once you valued yourself properly, you could never be undervalued. Once you understood your worth, you could never be convinced to settle for less. Jung's vision was of humans who'd integrated all aspects of themselves, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, love and boundaries. The awakened empath embodies this integration. You become dangerous not through aggression, but through absolute authenticity. This authenticity is revolutionary because it refuses to participate in the unconscious agreements that keep dysfunctional systems functioning. It says, "I will no longer absorb what isn't mine. I will no longer manage what I didn't create. I will no longer sacrifice my truth for others' comfort." If you're ready to stop being dangerous to yourself and start being dangerous to manipulation, comment, "I am sovereign in my empathy." Your journey from unconscious victim to conscious sovereign isn't just personal transformation. It's your contribution to collective healing. Every empath who awakens makes it easier for the next one to do the same. Share this with someone who needs to remember their empathic power. And if you want to understand more about Jung's insights into empathic protection, check out my video, Final Warning to Empaths. They're feeding on your light, where I reveal Jung's most disturbing discovery about energy vampirism. Subscribe, because we're just beginning to explore the depths of empathic sovereignty. Remember, you're not too much. You're not too sensitive. You're not too deep. You're exactly what this unconscious world needs to wake up. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.